All right, welcome to this webinar. It's 9 a.m. in California. I know it's where we are at in Sweden. It's 6 p.m. Wherever you are, welcome to this webinar with me and Magnus. But let's first talk about the title of this fantastic thing. Building a chat app using Weavy and Telerik Conversational UI is the focus of this webinar. And I almost said it, but the two of us here is me, Ricard Hansson, and this is
Magnus Krona is my name.
And he's the actual developer, and I'm the wannabe developer, as you can see. I used to code a lot when I was a kid. Before we actually going to get into the tech and the geek, which I know you're all here for, I'm just going to do some intro slides about Weavy and what Weavy is. And what Weavy is an in-app collaboration SDK and API. It's all about that your app is the place where work happens. Bring collaboration into your user experience. That is what we do. We're focusing on that you're going to launch like in a very quickly way, like in a couple of days or weeks from beginning using our stuff. Focus on what makes your app unique. And our framework or SDK API is completely designed for developers by developers. The key features in Weavy that most people use is instant messaging, secure file sharing, and activity feeds. Today we're going to talk specifically about instant messaging, obviously, and how you can use that particular with, in this case, Telerik components. We also have very powerful integrations with everyone and everyone, Zoom, Teams, Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, and Box, so you can easily just leverage that into your app. And it's all in the name of minimum effort for maximum effect for you guys. Increase user retention, reduce your churn. It's totally embedded. It's like Weavy is never a brand that your user is going to see. It's going to think you're super innovative and save up to 90% in cost, either using build yourself or use something else out there. So that is like the quick couple of slides about what Weavy is. And with no further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to you. And these are the topics we're going to talk about.
Thank you, Ricard. Okay, before we get started with the actual demo, I would like to talk about a couple of related things that we're going to do later on. And that is authentication, of course, the Weavy API, the Weavy real-time, and of course the Telerik Conversational UI component, which we are going to use today. So first off, authentication. Before you can use the Weavy API, you of course have to authenticate, and there's two ways you can do this. It's token-based and cookie-based. So the token-based authentication, that is when you create a JWT, which is a token that consists of the user information or user claims actually, like username, name, email, and so on. And more importantly, it also contains the Weavy authentication client ID, which is something you create in your Weavy instance that you use. And then you use the information in the token, and the client secret is used to encode the token. When you have a token, you can use this and pass along in your request to get the authenticated user. The other way you can authenticate is cookie-based. So what you do here is you create the token the same way as in when you use token-based authentication, but you only do this once, and you take this token and you pass it in to an endpoint that we have in Weavy on client/sign-in. And what you get in the response is the user and also a cookie that you can use for the rest of the session. So in this demo today, we are going to use cookie-based authentication. And that is because on the current version of Weavy and the current version of SignalR that we use for real-time, that's the only option actually now to do this. So speaking of real-time, Weavy has some real-time capabilities as well. But first off, we're going to talk about the Weavy API. I was a bit fast there. So the Weavy API, what is the Weavy API? Well, actually, it's not that much when you set up a new instance of Weavy. We don't have an API endpoint for every single thing you can do in Weavy, but instead we only supply the most fundamental things like user management. You can create and update content, spaces and apps that we have, and so on. But instead, we allow you, the developers, to create your own endpoints in Weavy, your own API. So you can create everything that you need specifically for your app that you create. So now the real time. So Weavy has some real-time capabilities. Weavy uses signal R to broadcast messages over a WebSocket. So when something happens in Weavy, for example, a user signs in or a content item is created or a file is uploaded and so on, a corresponding real-time event is pushed out to the users. So we have a signal R hub, which we call RTM, stands for real-time, that you can connect to, and you can create a proxy hub and start listening to messages. And in the demo app today, we are going to, or I'm going to show you how you can do this very easily. So, before we get to the actual code, of course, the Telerik Conversational UI component. This is a component from Telerik that mainly is actually built for
bot chats and stuff.
Yeah, bot chats. But it can also be used for a one-to-one or a one-to-many conversation. And that's exactly what we have in Weavy. So it's a perfect match here, actually. And it's a very nice component because it's both for the users, it's very easy to use and has a very consistent look and feel over different platforms as well. And also for the developer experience. So if you have developed with the, let's say in this example, the conversational UI component in a Xamarin app, you recognize yourself when you're doing a React app, for example. So I like it. So let's get into the demo. First off, all the code that I'm going to show you here today, both for the React app and also for the Weavy instance that I'm going to use as the backend, is available at our GitHub account. So if you go to github.com/Weavy, you will have all the repos there, not only for this demo, but also for our other tutorials and demos that we have. You can also check out our doc site, docs.weavy.com, where you can find this tutorial and also other tutorials. So, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to head over to my code editor. Let's see if we can get this perfect. Okay. So I'm using Visual Studio Code here, but you can of course use any code editor of your choice. I have cloned the repo, the KendoReact Weavy chat repo available at GitHub. And the first thing I want to do here is just type yarn to make sure that all the packages are installed. And after that, I can type yarn start to run the React app. And let's see what it looks like, what I'm going to show you here today.
Cooking.
There we have it. Takes a little bit while here. So, okay. So this is the first view we get. We get the login screen. So here I'm going to show you a little bit later how we authenticate the user. And for this purpose, it's only for demo purpose, we have prepared 4 different users that you can try with. So we have 4 different JWTs, 4 tokens that we have prepared for you. And if you select one of the user and log in, you will get to the actual app. So if we take a look at this, on the left-hand side here, we have a list of conversations. So this is the active conversations of the currently signed in user. We have the name of the chat, and in this case, it's who we are chatting with. Or if we have a many-to-many or a room conversation, you can see all the participants here. We also show the last received message in the conversation. And on the right side, we have the actual Telerik Conversational UI component, which render messages that we pass in. And it also has an input box here below and a button to send or add a new message. So this is what we are going to use here today. And I'm going to show you each part, how it's built. So let's get back to Visual Studio Code. We start off by going to the login form.js. And if we take a look here, we can see the 4 different users in the list and the 4 JWTs. So as I said, this is hard-coded here only for demo purposes. I'm going to take one of these tokens here and I'm going to show you what it looks like. And for this, I recommend a web page called jwt.io. It's a very useful site where you can create or inspect tokens. So we take a look at one of these tokens that is created for the Weavy. We can see here the claims, like the name, the email, the username, and so on. We see the expiry date is very long ahead in time. Of course, if it's a real token, it should be very short-lived instead. But this is for demo. And the important part here regarding Weavy is that we have a client ID, and this is the name of the Weavy client. So you create the Weavy authentication client in your Weavy instance. And for that, I'm going to open up here to show you. Here I am in a Weavy instance, and this is actually on an address showcase.weavycloud.com. So this Weavy instance is available for you to use in all the demos that we have at GitHub. So we have prepared a Weavy with all the necessary APIs for all the demos we have. And in this instance of Weavy, we have a client called Weavy Demo. So I'm going to create a new one here just to show you what the client consists of. We have a display name, the client ID, which we specify in a JWT, and the secret. So the secret here is important. This is what you encode your token with when you create your tokens. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So here we have the user. We select the user and we click login. What happens? Well, as I said before, we do a request. Since we're going to use cookie-based authentication here today, we do a request to the client sign in at the Weavy showcase.weavycloud.com site. We make sure to include the credentials, otherwise the cookie won't be set in which we get in the response. We pass in a token, and we only do this once. It has a bearer token. And when the user gets authenticated, we get the user info in response. And the first thing we do is connect. And I'm coming back to what connect is when we talk about real time. So for now, we can take a look at the login. The login is a function on a React context I created here for this demo, a user context. And it's only for demos, so it doesn't do anything special. The only thing it does is that it updates the state of the user variable here. So what happens when the state updates, the components get re-rendered, and if we take a look at the conversation component here, which is the main component here of our app, we can see that if the user is set, then we render the conversation list and the messages instead of the login screen. So it's nothing special, only for demo, but to show you the authentication flow in a simple way. So now we are signed in. So how do we get the user's conversations? Let's go into the component called conversation list. and see what happens. Well, if I expand here, you can see the first thing that happens when the component has rendered is that we make a request to our showcase site here, showcaseweavycloud.com /API/conversations. So this is not an endpoint that exists in if you set up a new instance of Weavy. This is something we have created for this app because we need it here. And I'm going to show you how this is done. So I'm going to go over to Visual Studio, and here I have opened up the Weavy showcase site, which I told you about. This is the Weavy instance prepared with all the APIs for these demos we have. So if we go to Areas API Controllers, we have a Conversations controller. This is an API controller we have created. And scroll down a bit, we have the route here, /conversations. What this does is we use the conversation service. And this is important to know that you have access to all the services in Weavy, the service layer. So the conversation service.search will return all the active conversations for the currently logged in user. So we get that back in array. So back to code, what happens here? Well, we have to include the credential to make sure the cookie is passed along. And then in the response, we set the conversations here. So this is React, so the conversations here is a state variable. So we update this variable. It's an empty array from the beginning. So when it gets updated, the component will re-render with all the conversations. And the render function down here, we can see it's a very simple. We only render a simple list item here. And we actually use another Telerik component here called avatar, which we can use to render an image or avatar, profile image. And then we'll output the title here of the conversation and the last received message. So if we take a look at the result, the app, this is what we get here in the left-hand side. We can get the currently logged in user's conversation. So what we want to do next here is that we want to be able to click on a select as conversation and display the conversation's messages. And this is where the Telerik Conversation UI component comes into picture, because this is the power, what makes it so powerful. It's very easy to use this. So if we take a look here back to the React app, we have a messages component, and it's in this component that we add the chat, Telerik chat component. We have it down here, and this is the Telerik component. What this expects is the user of the current logged in user and a messages array. So what we want to do, we want to get the messages for the current conversation. So let's see how this is done. Here we can see that when the component has rendered, the first thing that happens is that yet again we make a request to the showcase site, API conversation. We pass in the current conversation ID and we want to get the messages. So back to Visual Studio, just to show you, this is also an API endpoint that we have created. It's down here in the get, here's the route. So first we check that the conversation actually exists, and then we use the get messages method on the conversation service to get all the messages in the specific conversation. We get that in return, and yet again we update the state of the messages variable up here. So it's an empty array from the beginning, and now it's populated with an array of messages. One important thing here is that the Telerik component doesn't expect the format for a message as it is in Weavy. So we have to map every message here to the expected format, which is a text, a timestamp, and an author. And when we do that, Telerik will render this very nicely. It will render all the messages from the current set user here on the right, which is me, so to speak, or the current signed-in user, and on the left, all other messages. So the last thing I want to do in this application flow is that we want to be able to add a new message, of course. And the Telerik component has an input box here at the bottom and a send button. So how do we hook up to that? Let's go back to the messages component, and if we take a look at the Telerik component, they expose an onMessageSend event here, event handler. And for this, we have hooked up the add new message function here. Let me just minimize here. And open up that new message. And this is very simple here, because the only thing we actually do here regarding the Telerik component is that we update the messages array with the new message. So the component is re-rendered with the new message. But that's not enough, because we need to get the new message to the backend, to the Weavy instance as well. So what we do here, we do a new post request to our API. We include the credentials, of course, and we pass along the actual message. So if we take a look at the API function, scroll down a bit, we can see we have our post here. And now we use the message service to insert. And that's actually pretty much add a new message here. So now we can sign in, we can list conversation, we can show the messages, and we can add new message. The last thing I would like to show you is regarding the real-time, because we want to take advantage of the Weavy real-time capabilities here in this demo as well. So when someone else is adding a new message to a conversation, I want the message to show up immediately, of course. So if you remember on the login form component, the first thing that happened was that we did a connect. So this connect function is something I have created here on a connection context. So another React context. It exposes connect function and a proxy variable. So when we do the connect, we can see that we do a new hub connection, a SignalR hub connection to the showcase weavycloud.com site. And then we create a new proxy with the RTM proxy, which is the name of our real-time proxy in Weavy. And then we start the connection. We also update the state variable proxy here, which is exposed on this React context. That means that we have access to this proxy variable in all our other components. So let's take a look, for example, in the messages. The first thing that happens here, if we take a look here, is that when the component has rendered, we check if the proxy is set. And if it does, we add a new event listener on the event received message. And this is the name of all the messages sent from Weavy. What we can do then is we can check the type, which type of message it is. And we are only interested in the name called messageinserted.weavy. We then take and parse the data, which is the actual incoming message, and we just add it to the messages array. And that's actually it. So, well, I think I'm done here.
Okay, that's great. So pretty rad. And if you go to the Weavy Docs tab,
yeah,
just want to show that. So here you have all the documentation about Weavy overall, but also specifically the tutorials you just showed, and you can filter that through Telerik. So go ahead and go there, and all the code, as Magnus already said, is on GitHub. And I wrote down some thoughts and questions I kind of want to clarify. So what you guys see here is like, so we created now a demo specifically for Kendo or Telerik KendoReact. But as you can see, you can use whatever you want, like Angular, React Native, or whatever that might be. This is just like kind of showcase for that particular framework or technology. The way of doing it is obviously the same. So Weavy works with anything. And something that is interesting here as well is like if you compare Weavy to a lot of other vendors out there, as Magnus mentioned, like the APIs we created here are specifically created for this demo, which is like really powerful because it means like you're not stuck to specific APIs that we defined. There is a couple of APIs you can use, obviously, and you can even change them. But you can create whatever API you want, and you can do a lot of things in those APIs, which means like you can have better performance, less latency, and so on and so forth, because you can do a lot more with your own stuff as well, not only our stuff. So Weavy, from that case, like it's completely open. And sure, now we use this like again, Telerik KendoReact components. But if you built your own UI controls for your particular project, whatever that might be, again, it doesn't really matter, right? This is just a showcase. And as you can see with the other tutorials we have on the website as well, just get some inspiration for them. And some are clean, like JavaScript web approach, and some of them, as we mentioned, is Xamarin and React. So those are the things I was thinking about. Let's see if there's any questions on the chat. I don't think so. There's only some applause and whatnot. So that's good. I don't have any more to add. This was the full purpose, obviously, of this webinar. After the fact this webinar is done and you guys have signed up, we're going to send you an email with the whole presentation Magnus did, with shortcuts and links to all those different repositories and tutorials we mentioned. And if you have any questions or whatnot, just look us up on LinkedIn or anything else. If no one else is asking something, no, okay. Then we are signing out from Sweden. Have a great day. And I have to thank my producer in LA, Andy, making sure that the sound is okay and whatnot. And I think that's very fancy-schmancy to actually have a producer in LA. Anyways, signing out from Sweden. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.